This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Kathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started. Hello, I'm Kathy Worthington, welcoming you to our latest episode of Late Boomers. Today, our guest is Chris Donaldson, who has a fantastic story to tell us about. He left Belfast in 1979 and has ridden a motorbike nearly around the world, but he's now going to finish what he started by riding in Australia. Along the way, he's ridden through Africa and South America and many, many other places.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Chris's book is called Going the Wrong Way. We are going to hear from Chris about the many places in Africa and Europe and North and South America that he's ridden and find out what his next journey will be. He will be accompanied on the next leg by a friend, and together they will complete his trip around the world. Welcome, Chris. Can't wait to hear about your life.
Nice to be here. Nice to be talking to you guys.
Great to have you coming all the way from Ireland today, where we're in the afternoon and you're in the evening over there while we're recording this. This is great.
You're back in Belfast.
Yeah.
We're about 20 years behind as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, please tell us about your background and how you developed such a strong sense of adventure.
Well, I guess it's probably part of my growing up. I grew up in Belfast in the 70s, which wasn't a great time to be in Belfast. It was more or less a civil war going on. Everybody's heard about the Troubles, and used to go to school in the centre of the town where you could see bombs going off. Father's business got blown up several times. I never got shot at myself or anything, like got into too much trouble, but it was just a bad vibe going on. Of course, when you're a kid, you don't really notice these things because it's all excitement and adventure, and you don't know anything else anyway. But I guess when I got into teenage years, I thought there must be more to life than Belfast, so I was determined to get out of town, and I had a motorbike, and I thought the best way to go would be to go on a motorbike for some peculiar reason, which I still haven't worked out why. But I decided to go to Australia.
Nobody mentioned you were on an island, huh? A motorbike seems extreme.
Yeah.
The island wasn't too bad. Problems left whenever I didn't get very far before the problems started. I got to London from Belfast, which is about a day's drive, and spent a few days in London, seen some friends, and then the Ayatollah decided to take over the American embassy in Tehran, if you remember back those days. I think it was November 79. So basically I'd been planning and drawing my routes and getting all my visas, my guidebooks to drive across Europe and across Asia to Australia. And after 2 or 3 years planning it, I left a week and I couldn't go any further because the route was blocked. So I knew the choice was either go home, which would have been too embarrassing after telling all my friends I was going to Australia, or else finding somewhere else to go. So I decided to go to Africa.
But what made you want to ride around the world that long ago?
I guess a sense of adventure, as you say. I wanted to go to Australia, but I wanted to see the rest of the world as well. You know, you go to school, you get your geography books out, and you see all these different places. And I guess maybe growing up in Ireland's such a small place, everything is the same. You sort of wanted to see just to learn about life, learn about the world, and have an adventure of some sort.
Well, not only did you live on an island, you had to go across a lot of oceans on your motorcycle. That would have been challenging.
Yeah. Well, the oceans were the easy part. It's the land that's the difficult part. Incidentally, one of the I remember I was about 16. I read a motorcycle magazine about a lady who was riding around the world on a motorbike. And it was the same model
Oh,
motorbike as I had then, the PSA. Now, that was back in probably 76, 75. And she was a bit older than me. But I was at a motorbike rally 2 years ago, and who was talking at it but this lady who had driven around the world on a motorbike in 75, 76. So the incredible coincidence that I actually met the lady who had inspired me 40 years before to go off and do my thing. And I met
oh,
her 2 years ago. Unfortunately, she passed away this year,
Oh,
but
sorry.
she's a real character.
I'm glad you got
Mhm.
to
So
meet
the world's
her.
not such a big place. Yeah,
Yeah.
she was amazed that her trip inspired me all those years ago.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
What's making you want to complete your trip around the world now?
uh, finishing a job needed done. I suppose wasn't my idea. It was I wrote the book Going the Wrong Way about 3 years ago. Finished it, which is another story altogether because I was never an academic English expert. It's never very good at school in any way, to be honest. So for me to write a book was quite an achievement, and it's been a bestseller on Amazon quite a few months. So it's
Mm.
moral of that story. If I can write a book, anybody can.
Ah.
Uh,
So you say.
yeah. So yeah, I
No.
wrote the book a couple of years ago, and one of my friends who also has a motorbike thought, "Well, he said you didn't get to Australia. Why not have another go?" So
Mhm.
it was a challenge I couldn't walk away from. So as luck would have it, I still had my old motorbike, the old Motor Guzzi that I used the first time 40 years ago. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do it myself, I'll need to take my old motorbike to bring the team back together again, so to speak.
Mhm.
So I got to Australia last year, finally after 43 years after leaving home. Finally
Mm.
got to Australia on the motorbike.
Oh, good.
Had
Had a
you
great
been
welcome.
riding had you been riding throughout the whole 42 years when you weren't going around the world?
On and off, I was sort of I tend to do things on a on-off basis. I was into motorbikes when I was a kid, certainly, and then I got into sailing, and then I got into cycling, and then I got into flying. I've done
Yeah.
lots of different things as I've grown older, and then I've got back into motorbikes again. So the
Hmm.
motorbike
Wow.
hadn't had an awful lot of use. It was always sitting in the garage lurking around somewhere.
Mhm.
You've got to be quite the mechanic.
Well, it's interesting because Liam came with me, and as we started anyway, and he had a new modern Moto Guzzi, and I had the old 1975 one. And certainly his was more reliable, but whenever something went wrong with his bike, there was nothing we could do to fix it. We had to just find a dealer and get a new part for it, whatever it was. Whereas with my old sort of pre-digital machine, anything went wrong
Mhm.
with it, I could fix it with a spanner and a
Mhm.
screwdriver and a hammer sort of thing, and some duct tape. But
Yeah.
with the new stuff, if something breaks that's
Oh.
new these days, you just have to throw it away and buy a new one, or else take it to a
Oh.
dealer and get a computer out to fix it.
Well, your bike's
Uh-huh.
like an old friend.
It is. So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
currently in Australia waiting for me to come back.
Oh,
how has
okay.
the world changed since your first adventure? I've been dying to ask you that question because from the 1970s to now, that's many lifetimes.
Yeah, I mean, some things have changed, some things haven't. Likes of Israel's the same trouble as it was always in. The likes of the Middle East is still upside down. I was finally able to get through Iran and actually see the American embassy is still there. It's all boarded up, and it's actually the Museum of Espionage, they call it now.
Oh,
Oh, they call it that?
But yeah, it's
Yeah.
still there.
mm,
So yeah, no, the world's people are just the same. People are pretty good, pretty nice, no matter where you go. To be honest, the main thing's probably main difference in the world is probably the internet. It's changed so many things
yeah,
uh, for traveling,
Yeah.
especially. You've got GPS, you've got Booking.com. You could just, if you want to know anything about where you want to go, just Google it.
yeah,
One of the problems I had in the 70s and 80s was because I planned to go to Asia, and ended up going down Africa and South America and North America. I'd done no homework on those places, so I didn't know anything about them. So I was really traveling blind. In fact, at one stage, the Sudan actually drove off the edge of my map. I didn't know what was in the next country at all. I had to wait to buy a map in the next town to see where I was going next. So, I didn't realize it then. It was a bit of a frustration, a bit of an annoyance that I didn't know where I was going. But after a while, I realized it was part of the beauty of the trip because it sort of added to excitement. You didn't know your country was going to have a civil war or not. Of course, as well in those days, you got newspaper, but newspapers were written or a book was written. By the time it gets printed, it's out of date. It's just hard for kids to imagine these days. I think everything, all the information you ever need is so available on your fingertips now.
I think back
Have
in
you
those done
days,
a country count? How many countries have you driven through?
Oh, I think it's about 45 or something like that.
Oh.
It's probably not that. Maybe 45,
That's
50,
amazing.
around that. I sort of gave up at 30.
Oh, well, don't give up because you're still traveling. But how have motorcycles changed since your first journey? You touched on that because they're all computerized.
Yeah.
But
I mean, they're an awful lot better. In the 79, I left. You probably heard of the Paris-Dakar race.
No.
Have you?
Tell us.
It was like a rally which started about 79, and it started making off-road vehicles popular. Motorcycles got knobbly tires and made them for touring off-road, and the cars, they started doing Jeeps, became more popular and that sort of thing. Became trendy to have an off-road adventure motorbike, adventure car, sports utility vehicles, whatever you call it now. So that was just starting. My bike was an old, was what we call a cafe racer, which was made for running around cafes and bars and impressing the girls and stuff like that. It wasn't really made for long distance touring, and certainly not for driving over deserts and dirt roads in Africa. So the bikes these days they're a lot better, but as I say, whenever something does go wrong,
well, on
you're in
that,
big trouble.
when you went to Africa and then you went to the Americas and rode in North and South America, how many tires did you go through? Did you have to constantly get new tires?
Half a dozen, not that many really, because you're not. I mean, I've gone through a set of tires in a couple of days, in my sporting days, whenever I'd be driving fast around the countryside.
Wow.
But when you're touring, you're much easier on the throttle than you would be when you're racing around the place. So you don't go through so many tires. Went through a lot in Africa. They actually got broken because when you're driving across the desert, you let your tires down to about 10 psi, so they're practically flat. The trouble with that is if you ever hit a rock, and it bends your wheel, cracks your suspension. So went through a few sets of tires there, certainly. But I was pretty much unsupported, which means I was on my own. So it was part of the excitement or worry was if anything had gone wrong, such as something major mechanical breaking down, that would have been the end of the trip. Because it was, I worked for 6 months after I'd been a student. So I'd put £1,000, probably about $5,000 in today's money, which isn't really an awful lot to last for a year and a half driving around the world. So I was living pretty much hand to mouth. So money was my main, or lack of was my main handicap, probably,
I'm sure you found a lot of welcoming people offering you homes and food and all of that.
That's
on
exactly
your
it.
journeys.
People say people are terrible. People are really nice, actually. But most places you go to, they're friendly, they're hospitable. If they see somebody on their own, a traveler, they will take you in. They'll want to talk to you, especially in the 80s, because you'd be in South America, Peru, or somewhere like that. People are out of touch with. It's so hard to communicate in those days. So it'd be interesting to talk to somebody to actually find out what's going on in the world.
Yeah, that's
As
true.
I say, pre-internet, so much has changed with the internet. That's definitely the biggest change. But people are just as nice, just as friendly.
Yeah. Well, let's pivot a little bit back to your childhood. You mentioned that when you were a kid, all the what was going on in Belfast in the 70s didn't affect you, but it must have affected you in some way and challenged you to take your journey. How was that? What was it like?
Yeah, I probably did a bit. I mean, as I said, I was brought up in a middle class area. It was reasonably peaceful. But again, my father's family business got blown up several times.
Oh,
Best friend got shot at one stage. So it definitely affected us. Whether it probably, as I said, it probably gave me a bit of a sense of adventure. And as much as I was used to sort of armed police and travel soldiers having checkpoints and that sort of thing around the place, probably made me a bit more risk friendly or less risk adverse as I should have been in the likes of Africa and places like that. It's kind of hard to know because you can't compare yourself to somebody who grew up, because I didn't grow up anywhere else. So you've only got yourself to go by. You can't compare what it was like.
mm-hmm.
What would I have been like if I grew up in London or something like that? Who
Mm-hmm.
knows? But I certainly always had a bit of a sense of adventure,
You might be
which
an
has got me into a
accountant.
few scraps. Don't say that. There might be some accountants listening.
Of course there are.
The
There's
accountants aren't that bad,
that ride motorcycles too.
of course.
Why
So
did you want to be alone on your early journey? And have things changed now that you wanted to journey with a friend instead? But why did you want to be alone?
I think I wanted to. It was certainly a coming of age. I mean, when I wrote about the story at 60, I could realize it was a coming of age effect story to the journey. But of course, when I was on the journey myself, I knew I wanted to discover a bit about myself as much as anything else. Certainly wanted to challenge myself and find out about myself and how I would cope with different things. But also, well, not also, but as well as it's the best way to travel, because if you can imagine, if you go out for the night, if you go into a restaurant, a bar with 3 or 4 friends with you, chances are you'll just stand there and talk to each other all night. Whereas if you go
Mm-hmm.
into a bar on your own, you either stand there looking stupid, or else you start talking to somebody standing beside you. Just as a matter of course. So it's much more. And the other way is true as well. People won't talk to you if you're in a group, but if you're on your own, it's much easier to get talking to people. And one of the reasons you're traveling is to learn about people, discover the other cultures and what people are doing and what life is like in that particular place. So you need to talk to people. The journey is not just about the scenery; it's about the people that you meet along the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So
true.
it's hugely beneficial to be on your own, to meet
You,
people. The trouble is, it can obviously it's risk of security wise and that sort of thing. It's nicer to be with somebody else.
yeah.
And very often I ended up traveling with. I would meet somebody along the way and travel in the same direction we were going, and then part company at some stage, which is nice as well. Um,
Did you meet
and
any
there's
lifelong friends along the way that you still communicate with?
Yeah, well, guys don't write letters to each other. They don't do Christmas cards generally. We don't do postcards. So we meet people and we say see you again. And most people I lost touch with. But
Mm-hmm.
the beauty of Facebook was you could able to contact quite a few people through Facebook and through the book as well. I've been lucky enough to contact this guy I travelled around Israel with, a Scottish guy. Funny enough, he'd given me his name as Jeff, from a little village in the east of Scotland. The old schoolhouse in Tillycoultree or something like that was called. And it was over a couple of years ago with my daughter, who was in university in Aberdeen nearby. So I thought, well, let's just go down and see if by chance this guy is still living in the same town in the same house 40 years later. And
Ooh.
of course
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't.
Oh,
But Scotland being Scotland, I got talking to the
yeah.
postmistress and she says, oh, I know. There's a guy called Godfrey used to live down there. I said, well, the guy's definitely called Jeff. I didn't even have a second name.
Yeah.
And he says, no, it's definitely Godfrey, she said. And I've actually got his address. It's about 50 miles up the road. So she gave me his
Mm-hmm.
address. And I thought, it's the wrong name.
Oh,
different address. Who knows? Just some guy had a motorbike who lived in a village in Scotland. So I knocked at the door, and this little bald man opened the door. We didn't recognize it all until he smiled, and then when he smiled, I recognized the smile.
oh,
And he says, "You're Chris Donaldson." I said, "Yeah, you're Jeffrey." He says, "No, I'm Godfrey." And I don't know if you know, but used to be a program called Dad's Army on TV in the UK, and there was a character in it called Godfrey, who was an old fuddy-duddy, uh, fuddy-duddy old man. You would not have wanted to be called Godfrey when he was there, so he actually changed his name to Jeffrey.
oh, great.
So he gave me the wrong name, but I still tracked him down. Wrong name,
Good
no
for
address.
you. Good for you. That's
So
a
it's
sense
like
of
Yeah.
adventure right there. But what
Yeah.
did you learn about yourself from being alone?
That's a good question. I suppose that I'm fairly resilient compared to a lot of people who can keep going when other people will stop a lot, I suppose.
Hmm.
Jeff, or Godfrey, should I say, he's gave up in Israel. Ironically, the guy I left with last 2 years ago, the guy who talked me into going in the first place, got to Israel, and he decided to come home as well. So it's not for everybody. It's quite hard work riding a motorbike on your own. Lots of things can happen. Lots of things can go wrong. We got to Israel, we couldn't get out
Yeah.
because they wouldn't let us into Jordan. So I had to go back again, back to Athens, which meant we had to drive around through Greece, Turkey, and Iran to get to Dubai.
Wow.
Should say the first time I went, I was only 21, so I was able to go away for a year and a half, and nobody missed me, apart from my mother, probably. But this year, to this trip, I've got family, I've got job, so I couldn't just disappear for a year and a half or 6 months. So what we did was we left for 2 weeks, drove for 2 weeks, parked the bike up, came home, worked for 2-3 months, and then flew out again, did another 2-3 weeks, and then parked up again. So it was sort of got Australia by 6 legs. Took me. William didn't make it in the end. So I suppose it's one thing that traveling on your own taught me is if there's a problem, there's always a solution to it. Tomorrow will always happen. Something's going to happen, and it's up to you to make it happen. And if you just sit there and you're asked to do nothing, nothing will happen. You'll just be sitting there the next day. So I'm quite good, quite resilient in getting things moving along and keeping going, getting problem solving, I suppose. Just helped me in business through the years as well.
What do you think is the strangest thing that ever happened on your journey?
Strangest thing is probably when I got to Buenos Aires. I got ill in Peru, got hepatitis, which laid me up for a couple of weeks. And I rode the bike. You have to ride the bike. I'm going to tell you all the story. You're not going to buy the book if I tell you too much. But actually, sure, I ended up riding the bike a bit of distance, and then the roads got washed away. So I took a train and ended up in Buenos Aires railway station. Buenos Aires is a huge city; it's maybe 10 million people. And I lay down on the bench in the station. I was exhausted, and little did I know it, but I met a bunch of students in Peru in Machu Picchu. We took a couple of photographs, and the night before, this girl had been showing her friends her photographs. She did a slideshow, and she pointed out there was a motorbike guy from the UK I met. And basically that was that. And would you believe it, but one of her friends walked past me on the station, saw the motorbike sitting there, and rang Angela and said, "There's a guy sitting on a motorbike sleeping in the station. It sounded a wee bit like the guy you were talking about." And she came down, I was still sleeping there, and met me in the station. So I went back to their house and stayed with them. And their mother cooked me home-cooked dinners and made me well again. If I hadn't met them, I would never got the motorbike home at all because they got everything sorted out for me. But the weirdest thing, where it gets really weird, was the guy I was with in Peru is a German guy, was on a motorbike as well. And we parked parted company shortly after that because he was going down to the bottom of South America, down to Tierra del Fuego. And I cut it off to Buenos Aires. Now, he made it back to Buenos Aires about a month after that, and he was sitting in the main square in Buenos Aires looking around, feeding the pigeons or whatever. And he walked past him, but this girl, Angela, met him, bumped into him, invited him back to the house.
She really gets
stayed
around.
with him for a week as well.
Angela gets
You wouldn't
around.
believe it.
Wow.
The coincidence, the first coincidence possibility of it happening once would be, I don't know, 10,000 to 1, but for it to happen again, it's just, you just couldn't work out the statistics for that one.
Well, is that one of the most interesting and funny things that have happened to you? What's the funniest?
The funniest? Oh, the funny one's got to be clean, I suppose, doesn't it?
Cleanish, yeah.
Some weird things. So a funny thing was in South America, we got arrested. We camped beside the. We couldn't get over the border because the coastal border was too late, so we camped. We drove back up into the fields and camped.
Oh.
And the next thing, these searchlights came on and floodlights came on, and we're surrounded by armed soldiers. We camped right beside the army camp. We looked across, and there was a board of the army camp sitting there. Not only that, but there was about a week after that, there was a civil war started because Peru and Ecuador have been fighting over this piece of land for the last 200 years. Oh. So we just betwing the between the two trenches of warfare. You know?
Oops!
Oh dear!
So there's a few instances like that.
Oh, is this all in your book?
I don't know if I call that funny.
Pretty much.
Funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, ooh. Is this all in your book? I hope so. Tell us about it.
It is, yeah. So it's a motorbike book. It's more of a coming of age book.
Called Going the Wrong Way.
Going the Wrong Way. It happens to be a motorbike in it, but there's a lot of ladies, a lot of non-motorbike people have read it and really enjoyed it. I've been quite overwhelmed. Some of the reviews have been actually quite amazing. There's one guy thanked me for writing the book. He'd been reading it to his son who had scoliosis in his back. He'd been having various back surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And his son had really enjoyed him reading the book to him because as I was getting through the problems that I was coming up against, he was able to see the problems his son was coming up against in his own surgery, and it inspired him to hang on in there and get through the next surgery. I thought it was quite touching.
Oh, good.
Reach a few hearts and minds along the way, you know.
Yeah. Well, what was the writing process like for you on that?
Yeah.
What did you sit down and write it?
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. Did you sit down and write it
all
at once?
So. It took me 43 years to write it.
Because you said if anyone can write a book, and if I could write a book, anyone can, which is like 43 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I started writing it when I was 21, when I came back from the journey. And I suppose I'd probably written a manuscript or in the first draft, pretty much. And then when I got my mates came to the door and said, "You won't believe this, but somebody else has written a book about riding a motorbike around the world." There's a guy called Ted Simon who left years before me. He actually ended up living in California. And I've met him a couple of times since. He really helped me. He actually helped me write my book in the end. But he was about 45 when he did his journey. He was a journalist and a writer, whereas I was a 21-year-old student. So you couldn't have got two more different books. He was in the same towns and same places that I was a lot, but the experiences that he would have had were completely different from the experiences that somebody half of his age would have had. So, but it was nice. I quite enjoyed. It was hard work learning. I mean, I must have rewritten and rewritten it. Somebody said you don't write a book, you rewrite it. You just keep going over it and over it and improving it every time you write it. You know, if you write a letter, you read it again and you think, "Oh, no, I didn't mean to say that." So you get 400 pages of that.
Mary can relate to that because Mary's working on books. She always says it's all about the rewrite.
All
definitely.
about the rewrite. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But it
yeah.
was lovely in a way because I was able to effectively read my diaries. I read about what I was thinking, what I was doing when I was 21, when I was rewriting them when I was 60.
Have you
So I
always
was
kept
able to.
journals and diaries while you travel?
I've kept a few journals when I've travelled. Yeah, no, I've done a diary every day. My mum used to do that. She's got a room full of diaries somewhere in the Northern Ireland. But I've kept the odd journal when I've been travelling. There's something special. But I had, as I say, I had intended to write a book then. So it was amazing reading the stories that I'd written and then looking at my old photographs, which I hadn't looked at for a while. And it's a little bit like things that I'd thought I'd forgotten were able to come back quite sharply. It's like we're scraping paint off a piece of wood. It's sort of, it was all in there in the end, but you just have to scrape the layers, the fogs of 4 decades of alcohol
Wow.
abuse and and
How,
lifestyle.
how did you get all your writing in and your traveling? And you mentioned that you had a business. What were you doing besides?
What do you mean since in between times? You mean
Yeah, in between
Mhm.
travels. Yeah.
that 40 years? I've done a number of businesses. I came back in the family business, which was a retail furniture shop. And I expanded that. I opened shops in Belfast and London and Dublin. And then I got into property. I've always been a bit of a serial entrepreneur, I suppose you could say.
Mhm.
I ran a ladies' gym franchise. I was master franchisor for a ladies' gym franchise. And then when I fell out with the banks after the property crash in 2009, I ended up living in Dubai, living on a yacht actually in Dubai for 8 years. I ran a mobile app company there. So I've done quite a varied
Mhm.
number of careers. Although they've all been sort of joined up because they've all been a marketing, sales and marketing angle to them, I suppose.
You have.
Oh,
There's one
good.
Yeah.
sort of
Well,
angle
Chris,
on it.
what would you like our listeners to have as a takeaway today?
Well, your listeners are probably of a certain age, probably more or less. Would there be a
Well, we haven't been
certain
able
age
to
you think
put
We're
is
them in
all
a
we're
realistic?
all
box.
over.
They're all over the
We're
place.
eclectic.
We're
Yeah.
eclectic on
We
our
have
listeners.
18 to 90. How's that? Or 19 to
I did
90.
idea. But one of the reasons I suppose I wanted to go to Australia finally was to prove or to show that I could do what I could do when I was 21. Now I'm 65.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you've got your full faculties, you should be able to. You're not as fast as you used to be. You're a bit more tired at the end of it. I used to be able to ride a
Mm-hmm.
motorbike all day and go party all night after that. Now
Yeah.
I just want to go to bed with a cup of cocoa and have a good night's sleep. But you can still do. I can still do what I did when I was 21, just albeit slower and taking the
Mm-hmm.
time on it. And I think a lot of people, when they get into sort of late 50s and 60s, they sort of slow down so much they actually stop doing anything of any significance. Whereas really, there's no need to do that. You can get off your ass and do what you
Yeah.
want to do. Just, in fact, you should have a bit more money about and a bit more time about than you had when you were 21. So it should be easier in some ways. But I think it's all the main problem with getting old is in the mind. It's getting the motivation and the inspiration to go and do it. So I
Mm-hmm.
suppose I
That's
was going to
true.
say, I think it's get off your ass and do it.
Get off
Don't
your
talk about it,
ass.
just do it.
That's a
Yeah.
perfect takeaway.
That is. Get off your ass and go do it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah,
I
I'll
love
Yeah.
it.
close out with that one. Thank you, Chris. This has been great. Thank you for taking us on your adventure. And we're going to have to read your book, Going the Wrong Way. Our audience is going to have to look at it and read it and buy it too. Our guest today on Late Boomers has been Chris Donaldson, motorbike superb traveler of the world and author of Going
No,
the Wrong Way.
The wrong way.
An old movie,
going the
Going
wrong
the
way.
Wrong Way, which you can order on Amazon. His website is chrisdonaldson.world. And you can reach him on Instagram too at going the wrong way _book. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
We're so grateful to our listeners, and we want to ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Late Boomers Podcast, where you can watch the video version of our podcast. Also, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and give us a 5-star review. We're on Instagram at I am Kathy Worthington and at I am Mary Elkins and at Late Boomers. We always strive to inspire and entertain you. Thanks again so much, Chris.
A pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.